arrival of an exciting new advancement in the war effort, the air cavalry. At a press conference this week, Colonel Grimm announced that our superior military engineers have developed flight technology that is sure to defeat the Tan. The Army's first wing commander, Captain William Blade, is preparing to lead his Alpha Wolf Battalion to the front lines right away. I'm sure that we will all sleep just a little bit better, knowing that Captain Blade is defending our skies.
Army Men Air Tactics was my first introduction to airborne Army Men growing up. As a kid, my mom got me this 4-pack CD-ROM set from Sam's, with Army Men 2, Army Men Toys in Space, and Army Men Air Tactics. I always spent most of my time playing Army Men 2 and Army Men Toys in Space, but I do remember Air Tactics fondly. Unfortunately, it was a lot easier to play this game 20 years ago. I genuinely spent 3 or 4 hours finding it online, thank you myabandonware.com, fiddling with the compatibility settings, giving up on that entirely and abandoning getting it to work on Windows 11, teaching myself how to set up a virtual machine, finding an ISO and a CD key for Windows 95, installing Windows 95, and then installing Air Tactics on the Windows 95 virtual machine just to play it. A game designed for Windows 95 a quarter century ago just does not like to cooperate with Windows 11. Was it worth all that effort? Maybe. The Army Men Air games have an exceptionally convoluted history as far as naming goes, so to avoid the confusion I had in one of my Army Men Discord servers, I'll explain it all here. The first Air game in the Army Men series to be released, which was also the first introduction of Captain William Blade as a green protagonist, was Army Men Air Combat on the PlayStation in late 1999. Then, in March 2000, Army Men Air Tactics released on Windows. In July 2000, Army Men Air Attack is released on the Nintendo 64, but under the name of Army Men Air Combat. A Game Boy Color game with the same title would be released in November of 2000. Also in November of 2000, Army Men Air Attack 2 would release on PlayStation. Then, in March 2001, Air Attack 2 released on PlayStation 2, but would inexplicably have the title changed to Army Men Air Attack Blades Revenged in Europe, but only for the PlayStation 2 version. The PlayStation 1 version is still called Army Men Air Attack 2 in Europe. Later that year, in June 2001, Army Men Air Attack, the first one, would release on Windows, although it did not carry the Air Combat title. For some reason, that is apparently just for Nintendo platforms. Lastly, in March of 2003, Air Attack 2 released on GameCube, with the title Army Men Air Combat: The Elite Missions. So, as you can see, it's a confusing release history. The TLDR is that Army Men Air Attack / Air Combat came first, and they're the same game. Then came Air Tactics. Then came Air Attack 2 / Blades Revenge / The Elite Missions, which are all the same game. Why they couldn't just pick one title and stick with it across regions and console manufacturers, I don't know, but it is what it is. Air Tactics isn't a 3D game like Air Attack. Instead, it uses a modified version of the Army Men 2 engine to produce a 2D overhead view game. While you normally think of helicopter combat as taking place in a three-dimensional space, and it does in a way, the 2D perspective works well here. I guess it's more accurate to call it a sort of pseudo 2.5D perspective, because you do move along the Z-axis, but only in certain places that have ramp-like environmental features, and only up to a certain height. Basically, you maintain a static hover above the ground, so the only way to ascend is to go somewhere with a gradually increasing elevation. Like in Air Combat, you follow Captain William Blade of Alpha Wolf Squadron. Most of his missions are a support role for Sergeant Hawk, but you do get to take on some pretty fierce Tan opposition as you're ferrying Hawk and his men around, or softening up a beachhead for an assault. The story revolves around the Green Army's attempt to establish and maintain air superiority, and to stop the Tan from developing some kind of chemical weapon of mass destruction. Visually, the game is pretty much identical to Army Men 2. Some elements here and there look a touch improved, but overall, it's basically Army Men 2 with a helicopter. The visuals, despite what other reviews may say, are honestly the highlight of the game. This era of advanced 2D in lieu of the primitive 3D graphics is sorely underappreciated in my opinion. The sound design is, well, I honestly have no idea. Despite the fact that the sound worked normally on the desktop of my Windows 95 virtual machine, nothing I did made the sound work in-game. From what I can remember from playing it over 20 years ago, it sounded great, but that could just be the rose-tinted headphones talking. What I can definitely speak to is the control, and that's not great. The helicopter feels super floaty and imprecise with its controls. Granted, I am using a modern mouse instead of an old-school trackball that this game would have been designed to use, so the oversensitivity of my mouse could have affected me here, as it did in Army Men 2 and Army Men Toys in Space. Although considering that most reviews I've read also lament the controls, I believe driving a car on a field of Crisco is how IGN's reviewer worded it, I'm inclined to believe that the controls really are just that bad. What I know for a fact isn't a problem caused by my modern mouse, though, is the hit detection. It was seemingly random whether my shots would hit a tan soldier or harmlessly hit the area beside his feet. There would be bullets you can clearly see hitting him. Visible bullet pixel on body pixel contact, but no damage. And then sometimes a bullet would clearly miss, but you would still see flakes of tan plastic break off as he takes damage. No rhyme or reason whatsoever. Despite the horrific controls, the garbage hit detection, and the inexplicably absent sound during my playthrough, I have to admit that I did enjoy revisiting Air Tactics. It's definitely not what I would call a high point for the series, but it's also not major malfunction, so it's at least not the worst game in the series. If you want to give this one a play these days, though, good luck. You will either need a computer running Windows XP or earlier, maybe Vista at the absolute newest, or a virtual machine running ideally Windows 95 or Windows 98. I know that for most tech-savvy people, virtual machines or dual-boot PCs are no big deal, but I'd never used one before, and it was a major pain in the ass to teach myself how to set one up for literally the sole purpose of playing this one single game. Do I regret that massive time investment? Not even a little bit. No Army Men game left behind. Would I recommend anyone else who doesn't already know how to set up a virtual machine go through the hassle just to play this game? Absolutely not. My rating for Army Men Air Tactics on PC is a D.